In this video, let's lift the veil of mystery about the healing of a whole ward of insane murderers, rapists, and violent patients at the Hawaii State Hospital. The story is widely known as a miracle of reciting the mantra of "I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, and thank you."
About this Hawaiian practice that you go through, and it involves, I believe, repeating a set of kind of 4 mantras in your mind. Tell me a bit about it, because it's interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating, and we need a lot more time to talk about it. I wrote 2 books about it, Zero Limits, and 10 years later I wrote At Zero. This book has changed millions of lives. It's the true story of a therapist who helped heal an entire ward of mentally ill criminals by using this Hawaiian process called Hooponopono. Now, you don't need to remember Hooponopono, but I'll tell you how simple it is. There's 4 statements. And what the therapist was doing, he was working at a hospital for the mentally insane. These people were shackled and sedated because they were so dangerous. They were murderers, they were rapists, they were violent. The hospital couldn't keep staff, it couldn't keep doctors. In a desperate attempt to get a doctor on call, they found this Hawaiian therapist who said, well, I'll go and I'll be there as your therapist and you'll satisfy your state requirements, but I'm not going to do traditional therapy. I'm going to do Hooponopono. So he started doing Hooponopono, these 4 phrases, and as he did it, those patients got better. They didn't have to be shackled. They didn't have to be sedated. In a few months, they started to be released, being pronounced as healed and whole. In 4 years, that ward was closed. I researched this. I interviewed him. I wrote Zero Limits, which is the story about this. I did seminars with the therapist. And the 4 phrases are so simple. He is saying these 4 phrases inside himself to his connection to the universe, to God, to the divine, to Gaia, whatever you want to call that higher power. We all have different words. I call it the great mystery or the great something. And he's saying inside himself, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and thank you. I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. That's all. So what's happening?
So, what's happening? Great question. In this video, we are going to investigate which version of Hooponopono had brought the miraculous healings of those hardcore criminal patients. Was it Morrnah Simeona's self-identity through Hooponopono? Or was it Dr. Hulen's mantra? In the interview, Joe Vitale recounted the Hawaii State Hospital story. The story was a cornerstone of his book Zero Limits, published in 2007. The story is now often quoted by YouTube videos, websites, and blog articles. Indeed, this is an incredible story showing the power of Hooponopono. It's worth investigating how Dr. Hulen performed the healings. First, let's take a look at the Hawaii State Hospital where the story took place. The Hawaii State Hospital is a mental hospital located in Kaneohe on the Oahu Island. Its history can be traced all the way back to 1866. In that year, King Kamehameha IV established the Oahu Insane Asylum. 6 mentally ill prisoners were transferred to the asylum. In 1930, the asylum's patient population increased to 541. They were transferred to the new territorial hospital in Kaneohe. In 1959, the hospital was renamed Hawaii State Hospital. The facility was designed to be self-sufficient due to its isolated location. It had its own electricity and water supplies. It also had its own agricultural and livestock farms. There was a creepy side of the facility. Many patients had died and buried on hospital grounds. Allegedly, the facility was haunted by ghosts. Patient violence has been a long-standing problem at the hospital before, during, and after Dr. Hulen's work at the hospital between 1984 and 1987. Here is a news report on patient violence in 2014.
Horror stories from the state hospital. Some say violent assaults on staff are on the rise. Good evening, I'm Paula Akana.
And I'm Yanjanice. Lawmakers are calling for a stop to it before someone is killed. KITV4's Catherine Cruz has more in our top story. Catherine.
Well, 2 senators are calling for a special investigative hearing into the attacks. They hope to get judiciary, public safety, and health department officials to the table to address the cries for help.
I got injured by him hitting me in the head, slamming me on the wall.
Melinda Yarte says she's lived with pain for 4 years after being attacked by a mixed martial arts fighter at the Hawaii State Hospital. She was also living in fear because she was told he'd been released.
And they've all been referred to psychologists to help them get through this, but we're getting resistance from the state to even allow that to be treated, which I think is really a major issue.
And this charge nurse, knocked unconscious by an attack, is asking for a review of the current treatment policies covering patients.
It's very difficult to begin treatment when a patient is violent. He's acting out, he's punching, he's spitting, he's biting. So it's very, very difficult.
The state hospital has long had a history of problems. At one time, it was under a federal court order to improve the severe overcrowding and the poor conditions of its facilities. Much has improved over the years, but staffing remains an issue for some. 6 years ago, lawmakers passed a law making assault on hospital staff a Class C felony. But some senators say changing times may mean a review of current practices is overdue. The hospital does have private security patrolling the premises, but the state says in keeping with national standards, armed guards are not allowed on staff. Now, the state health department declined an on-camera interview but issued a written statement saying the well-being of staff is a priority. It says there have been 90 reported assaults at the hospital so far this year, but it is down from 120 last year and 132 the year before. 6 of the cases this year resulted in lost work time. There were 4 the year before and 6 in 2011. Back to you, Yunji, Paula.
Let's now hear what Dr. Hulen had to say about his Hawaii State Hospital story. This account was recorded in 2008 after Zero Limits was published.
See again, when I was working at Hawaii State Hospital a long time ago, the ward I was working in was basically the ward for the criminally ill in the psychiatric unit. But the whole story was I had to remind myself over and over that what I was experiencing of the patient was really my own stuff, my very own stuff. So the idea was very clear to me. If I cleaned and made an appeal to the divinity, and I was willing to do it no matter what my thoughts said to me, then I would be okay. So when I started there, all of the seclusion rooms were filled with people. I mean, every seclusion room had a person in there that was designated as violent. In the ward, there were several people who had restraints, metal restraints at their ankles and on their wrists because they were violent patients. But I had to remind myself over and over again, hello, Hew Len, this is your experience. It is something that you can let go of. And so over the months that I worked there, as I began to work only on myself, that is, whatever experiences I had of the ward, of staff, of people, and I had a lot of judgment. People using medication, why are they putting them in lockups? It's so inhumane. But as I was willing to work on that, let it go, slowly, at some point, nobody was in seclusion, nobody was in chains, and so the idea always comes back that where is the problem? That when we every time there's a problem, we are always there. So the question is, where is the problem? And the problem is very simple. The problem is a memory replaying in the self. And so you have a choice. You can either make an appeal to divinity by saying, I love you, thank you, drink your solar water, eat your strawberry, do any of these cleaning tools. You're making an appeal to divinity, and you're festing up. You're saying, listen, I'm sorry that whatever's going on in me that I'm suffering from is in me. So I would like to make an amends. So as you clean, divinity reaches down and transforms those memories to nothing. And that's where you want to be. You want to be at nothing, because at nothing, then inspiration comes through.
Dr. Hulen's description is consistent with Zero Limits. But notice that he did not proclaim which version of Hooponopono he had used to heal the mental patients. Instead, he was highly suggestive that he used his mantra and cleaning tools for the job. According to Zero Limits, a social worker, Ms. Hamaguchi, wrote to Joe Vitale. She confirmed Dr. Hulen's involvement at the hospital. This is what she wrote.
So when another one of those psychologists showed up, it was assumed he would try to stir things up, attempt to implement state-of-the-art programs, then leave almost as soon as he came. However, this time it was a Dr. Hew Len, who, besides being friendly enough, appeared to do next to nothing. He didn't do evaluations, assessments, or diagnoses, he provided no therapy and did not perform any psychological testing. He often came late, and did not attend case conferences or participate in mandated record keeping. He instead practiced a weird process of self-identity Hooponopono. And things began to shift. Seclusion rooms began clearing, patients were becoming responsible for their own needs and business, they also began participating in planning and implementing programs and projects for themselves.
He practiced a weird process of self-identity Hooponopono, Ms. Hamaguchi wrote. Now, remember, Dr. Hew Len worked on the mental patients between 1984 and 1987. He took his first class of Morrnah Simeona's Hooponopono in 1982. He later traveled and taught Hooponopono together with Morrnah until a few years before Morrnah passed away in 1992. It is highly unlikely that Dr. Hew Len used his mantra and cleaning tools on the hospital patients in 1984. In fact, he had not publicly taught his mantra until many years later, around 2005 and 2006.
Dr. Len, could you tell us a little of the background and experience that you had working in the institutions?
Yeah. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and the people I work with, I did work with for 5 years, were what we called criminally mentally ill. And these are people who have either killed or raped or murdered someone and then got adjudicated being insane. So these are people I've had an opportunity to work for 5 years. And one of the things I discovered in working with them is that their problems really are our problems. That if we are willing to look just at ourselves and really release the judgments we have of them or other people, they really get well. That's been my experience, just by working on ourselves. So what I used to do at the institution is I did not have therapy. I didn't have any therapy, didn't talk to anybody. That all of the work that I did at home. I did between myself and the divinity, asking the divinity, what is it that I needed to do to clear myself with the patient, and then what he felt would be right to do with the patient. So didn't talk to them, didn't have a therapy.
This interview was recorded in 1986 when Dr. Hew Len was still working on the mental patients. With the presence of both Morrnah and this interview, it is self-evident that he used Morrnah's Hooponopono process. Perhaps the most conclusive evidence is a letter signed by Dr. Hew Len to promote his Hooponopono seminar in 1990. The letter is shown in an article by Morrnah's student Michael Mickley. In the letter, Dr. Hew Len described how he worked on one of the mental patients at the Hawaii State Hospital in 1984. He clearly mentioned that he had applied Morrnah's Hooponopono process. In conclusion, after Morrnah's passing away in 1992, Dr. Hew Len often made suggestive statements of using the mantra of I love you, thank you, to heal the mental patients. Why didn't he make a direct statement? Because if he did, it would be factually incorrect. Joe Vitale understood that the Hawaiian State Hospital was such a powerful story to promote the easy-to-use mantra. And Dr. Hew Len didn't hesitate to endorse zero limits and to participate in the promotional scheme. This video is not intended to discredit the mantra, but try to set the record straight. In the next video, I'll share some of my experiences of practicing the two versions of Hooponopono.